when you actually think about this process of the Conservative membership voting for their next leader, at this point in time, it makes total sense that people who pay a subscription service to be a member of the Conservative Party and are still paying it, so they've gone really through thick and thin with them, they get to say who's going to lead the party in opposition. When you actually think about that process, that you're able to deselect or the Prime Minister is able to stand down as leader, and those, I think it was 160,000, wasn't it, the membership at the time, got to elect the next Prime Minister. I know that we have this system where you're not voting, when you vote in your constituency, you're not voting for the Prime Minister, you're voting for your local MP. Still, it's totally nuts that few people were able to elect the Prime Minister.
But also they elected a Prime Minister that was then deposed by the Parliamentary Conservative Party, Liz Truss.
Would you feel disenfranchised as a Conservative member?
I feel like that was what Ed got out of the NatCon, the most recent one that he went to, was that a lot of people there were disenfranchised, pissed off that the Parliamentary Conservative Party is so at odds with the Conservative membership that they can spend 6 to 8 weeks campaigning for the vote of the Conservative membership, get into power, become the Prime Minister and the leader of the party, and then within a month be kicked out because the membership made the wrong decision, according to the Parliamentary Party, and then the Parliamentary Party effectively just put in their guy, you know?
But you could argue, I suppose, that like the Parliamentary Conservative Party are maybe more in tune with the British public in general than the Conservative member base.
Yeah.
Would you base that off of the policies that they introduced towards the end of their administration?
No.
Which one stood out to you most? Maybe it was Boris Johnson's imperial measurements plan.
Big fan of that.
Put the crown back on the glass, I say.
They actually got it bang on with the pothole stuff. I wonder if Sunak had been quicker to get that £9 billion into filling all the potholes around the country, whether they would have won the election.
A blue wave. The smoothest roads in the Western world.
Sometimes I cycle over Moorgate and I think that I'd vote for anyone who resurfaced that road. But I'm a cheap vote.
I mean, and that's what constituency politics is, you know. Like, as you say, you vote for your MP, it just so happens that your MP may become the Prime Minister of the country. But it is things like that, like potholes, like the swimming pool, like whatever.
We should fill all
issue.
of the swimming pools. That's like
concrete over every one of them.
Did I make this up, or was there a point in time when we were embarking properly on nuclear and they were looking at like disused swimming pools to put like nuclear waste?
Really?
I don't know if I've totally made that up or if I remember that from like hearing it on the news as a child. I don't know. You definitely didn't have this issue in Scotland.
So it isn't like, it's not recent Conservative proposals.
This would have been when I was like a child.
Right, okay.
Yeah, all right. So yeah, it wouldn't have been recent, all right?
Like, you're not 10 years old, so that, like...
Yeah.
Can we cut that? That's so dumb.
No,
I'm getting rid of that. I'm getting rid of that.
Leave it in audio only. Right, what do you make of Priti Patel, Laura? Do you think that she's got a vying chance?
I think she's definitely probably the most divisive figure of all of them, and like we were saying, the most recognisable as well. I think she plays... She's not so far right as Suella Braverman that I think she could capture a bit more of the moderate vote as well if she takes that kind of law and order approach that, well, she was quite heavy-fisted with it when she was Home Secretary. So I think she could appeal to that. But I mean, Tom Tugendhat was going after the law and order line in his speech, which was the first that we've heard from any of these candidates, where he was saying that the riot should have been confronted earlier with an overwhelming police presence, which I'm not quite sure what he meant by that, and also how effective that would have been.
She wanted to recall Parliament.
Yes, she did.
Which seems nuts to me, because I don't remember a time when she ever advocated for recalling Parliament over the past few years. Suddenly she wants
to... It's crazy what opposition does to you, isn't it?
She wants a parliamentary clip, yeah. I think that...
Clip me up, you cowards!
I was looking through her Twitter feed this morning, and I was looking she's been tweeting a lot about immigration, which you would expect her to do because she's more on the right of the party, and the battle between the three of those, Patel, Jenrick and Badenoch, is going to be fought on immigration and who can reduce it, right? But I was really surprised that she'd been tweeting multiple times about how she'd actually managed to curtail immigration because she had limited the number of, she'd put a stop to EU free movement. And it was like...
So you stopped legal migration?
Yeah, and it was sort of like, okay, but net migration last year was 700,000. And look, let's leave all of the morality and the discussion about immigration aside for one moment. If your sole role is you've been instructed by the PM or by the public, your voting public, to curtail immigration, if you're looking at a net figure of 700,000, I wouldn't say that you've achieved. Mm-hmm. Because she was in Johnson's cabinet when Johnson was using all of those, the sort of post-Brexit freedoms, right, to lift the caps. Mm-hmm. So he lifted the caps on immigration while closing EU freedom of movement.
Yeah.
That's not particularly conservative.
Yeah. I think it's going to be interesting as well in her campaign, or once we start to get a clearer view of what the Conservative membership thinks of the candidates, whether or not they see her as yesterday's woman. Because the thing that you heard it bandied about in some of the videos that we've done before, that like people weren't happy, some members of the Conservative Party were not happy with Boris Johnson leaving the party. Some wanted him to return to the front line of the Conservative Party as well. By that standard, you kind of assume that the people who were close to him at the time are still regarded in a positive light by those people. But when the narrative is shifted, like the way Priti Patel was talking about the riots, for example, was comparatively very reasonable when you look at someone like Robert Jenrick saying that we should criminalize people saying Allahu Akbar. That I wonder if the party membership has moved on to that point to being to regarding that as a reasonable view of riots and public order and this kind of thing, and just seeing someone like Priti Patel as a leftist at this point. I think that's going to be a very interesting part of it, to see how far to the right the membership has shifted in the last 2 or 3 years.
I guess, though, all of it is both Patel, no, actually all three of them, Patel, Jenrick and Badenoch, seem pretty fair weather on immigration because their goalposts have moved throughout time. Like Badenoch, there was a speech that she gave in Parliament. She gave a question, I think it was from the backbenches, where she was talking about, I think she was thanking the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson at the time, for lifting the cap on student visas. And now she's one of the biggest proponents or advocates of limiting the number of students who can travel here with their dependents. Robert Jenrick, he resigned as immigration minister over parts of the Rwanda plan, and now he's one of the biggest proponents of the Rwanda plan. It's like, well, that doesn't make sense. And then Patel, again, she wants to cut the number of people immigrating here, but when you were Home Secretary, you were working with Boris Johnson to lift that cap. So it doesn't, if you're a Conservative voter, unless you've got sort of perhaps a lot of them have a goldfish memory, so this might be quite helpful for them. But if you're actually tracking who has been consistent on the points that you care about, none of these actually match up to what was promised, if that makes sense.
I wonder if Priti Patel will benefit not only from being distanced from Sunak, like Tom Tugendhat is, but also might, like Boris Johnson, I think, remains quite a popular figure within the Conservative Party, even though Partygate unfolded as it did. I think there's almost like I don't know if nostalgia is the right word, but for the sort of leadership that Boris Johnson had. And I wonder if Priti Patel being linked with him, if they're just going to remember the good times and not the bad.
No, I think there really is a nostalgia. I think that's the perfect word. There's there's a sort of the golden era of Boris Johnson when he was travelling up and down the country on that big red bus, and it was his speeches.
Yeah.
His speeches were, okay, that just before the election, was it 2 nights before the election, the Conservatives held that event in the Imperial War Museum. Rishi Sunak gave this speech. It was the last speech to be given. And to say to say that there was no applause would actually be
It was
too
like
kind
they got
to
the
him.
running order wrong and put
Yes.
the warm up back last. Right.
Boris Johnson walked out to a rapturous applause. This man could hardly get to the podium. People were clambering over each other to try and get a glimpse of him. You know, people were leaning. It looked like the Pope when he's in the mobile, and you know, or at Lord's. You know, like people were trying to touch him, and so I think you're right. There is a nostalgia for him, and yeah, by virtue of Patel having served in his cabinet and also being, did he put her? Did he give her the Dame?
Yes.
He must have, yeah.
Yeah. Who else? Would
Resignation honours, I think. wasn't it?
Yeah. So, I mean, by virtue of that, then, you know, and that she stayed very loyal to him as well.
Well, this is what I'm saying is I wonder how much she's going to tie her campaign into that. I wonder if he's open to endorsing her as the candidate. But it's also...
I didn't even think about that aspect of it. Who Johnson endorses.
But it's also... I think it's how all of the other candidates interact with her when it starts to become... When it's all 6 of them on a stage at a hustings. If it's a Badenoch and Jenrick pile-on against Priti Patel of this kind of thing of, I don't know, like, we had to make the hard decisions because you failed to do them when you were the Home Secretary or whatever it might be, right? That's what I think is the interesting part of it. And also whether that leaves the door open for people like Tugendhat and Cleverly to kind of just float in under the radar while everyone else eats themselves.
I guess the favourite before she lost her seat was Penny Mordaunt. And she is from the left of the party. She's more One Nation. She's even more left-wing, actually, than any of the 6 that have made it through to the competition. You could, I mean, the argument there would be that maybe the membership are looking for a softer leader. So maybe they will pick from the One Nation camp rather than the reform adjacent.